Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Vinyl Den, your channel for record collecting by record collectors. I'm Nick. Today I'm talking about 6 albums that changed music. There's a bunch of links down below. Make sure you go check those out. There's links for the Vinyl Den Facebook group, for the merch page, for the Spotify and Apple Music weekly playlist that we put together, and also the Patreon page. Make sure you go check all that out. Of course, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me the old thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below, and make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified every time I release new episodes. I really could have went a bunch of different directions with this list. Originally, it was only supposed to be 5, but I had a hard time picking just 5, big influential albums. So it ended up being 6. It could have been 10. It could have been 15. But drop me a comment down below. Let me know what albums you guys think, were hugely influential and really have kind of changed music. For me, I got to go all the way back to 1966. Of course, with Revolver by the Beatles. Revolver is a different kind of Beatles album. Of course, the Beatles were hugely influential from the very beginning, but with Revolver, it was a lot more innovative. It was a lot more. There was a huge evolution, I think, in the Beatles' early sound to what they did with Revolver, and I think Revolver really kind of shaped music moving forward, at least in the 60s and really in the 70s also. And I think you can look at Revolver and say, without this album, rock music would of course existed, but rock music I think would have sounded very different, especially over the next 10 to 15 years after Revolver was released. Where Revolver helped kind of shape rock music moving forward, the next album created an entire new genre. At least the first couple of albums did, at least. Of course, that is Paranoid by Black Sabbath, released in 1970. When Black Sabbath released their debut album earlier in the year, it kind of forged this whole new heavy metal genre. And I think Paranoid really kind of helped bring that sound to the masses. It really kind of created this doom rock, this doom metal that had to all the way through to today, still continues on. You can look at that, I think, specifically at Paranoid as the album that really kind of brought that to the mainstream. Without Paranoid, I don't think there's a Metallica, at least the Metallica that we know. There's probably no Nirvana either. Nirvana was very heavily influenced by a lot of Black Sabbath music. And, of course, Ozzy, as the lead singer of the band, there's probably no Ozzy either. He probably died somewhere in England a couple of decades ago. But, it's a great album. And like I said, moving forward, it really kind of shifted the heavy metal genre to a whole different kind of area. So by 1979, punk had been around for a decade. Punk really kind of had its roots in the late 60s. So by the late 1970s, punk was I'd say a big thing, but it wasn't quite mainstream. And then in 1979, The Clash released London Calling and kind of changed all that. And with what they did with London Calling was they took that classic kind of hard punk rock sound, infused it with a little bit of rockabilly, added in some reggae, and kind of made this whole new kind of sound moving forward. And this was the album that really brought punk out to the masses. And even though other bands had been doing kind of a similar sound of punk rock, it was this album I think really kind of legitimized punk rock, like I said, in the mainstream and also in the big, labels' eyes also. And I think really without the success of this album, you probably have no Operation Ivy, there's no Rancid, there's probably no Green Day, all those kind of punk bands from the late 80s through the end of the 90s, I think, owe this album a lot of credit. So Black Sabbath really kind of created that heavy metal or doom metal sound in the early 70s. And then this next album, I think, kind of completely changed that. And of course, that is Master of Puppets, released in 1986. And what Metallica did differently on this album were, their first album was really kind of a thrash album. Ride the Lightning was still kind of a thrash album. And then with Master of Puppets, they brought in this whole new kind of aggression that I think really kind of changed that heavy metal sound kind of moving forward. And even though that kind of had been in the heavy metal sound for a decade plus, it was this album here, I think, that really kind of pushed the heavy metal, that aggressive metal forward over the next, at least through the end of the 80s. I think this album here, without it, there really is no kind of mainstream metal. I think even moving into like the new metal in the early 2000s, I think without the success of this album, there probably isn't a place in mainstream music for those artists. I think if you look at hugely influential albums and albums that really kind of change a specific genre forever moving forward, there probably is no bigger album than NWA's hit from 1989, Straight Outta Compton. When this album was released, you had artists like Public Enemy that were definitely doing not quite the same kind of rap that NWA did, but a little more aggressive than some of the like bigger mainstream acts that were out there. But what really kind of dominated rap prior to this were artists like DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince, Biz Markie, MC Hammer, Run DMC, which all had relatively good albums. But then this came out and really kind of changed rap music forever. Straight Outta Compton really kind of exposed the rest of the world to that West Coast gang culture that was really prevalent in their music, in their videos, and really kind of sparked a lot of other careers moving forward from this. But without this album, obviously there is no Dr. Dre, there is no Snoop Dogg, there is no Eminem, probably no 50 Cent. There's a lot of other artists that came out after this that really kind of trace their roots right back to Straight Outta Compton. It created a very dark, very aggressive picture of what was going on out on the West Coast and on the lives of people out there that the rest of the world really didn't understand what was going on. And this album really kind of shone a light really on what was going on in those communities. And then the last one on the list is an album that I think has really influenced music over the last 30 plus years. Of course, that album is Nevermind by Nirvana. What Nirvana did with Nevermind really wasn't a unique thing. There were other artists that were doing it before Nirvana. Bands like Mudhoney is a great example. But it was Nirvana that really kind of brought it to the mainstream. I know a lot of people like to point the finger at Nevermind as the nail in the coffin of hair metal and things like that, even though a lot of those bands continued on past 1991 and were still making great music into the mid-90s. Even a band like Warrant that people really kind of, after grunge kind of took hold, a lot of those bands, didn't really have the same fans that they had previously. But, it wasn't really what went on with this album that did that to hair metal. It was just kind of an evolution in music. But, it's a great album. It's one I've loved for a long time, and it's one that personally really kind of changed my musical interests. But without this album, without Nirvana's Nevermind, there probably is no Bush. There's no Foo Fighters. There's so many other bands. Weezer you can even throw into that mix. So many bands that kind of came after it that because of this album and the mainstream viability of this album, that really kind of pushed that entire Seattle scene back in the early 90s that so many other bands kind of came out of and were heavily influenced by. But, of the last 30 years, this is probably, at least in my opinion, probably the most influential album. Well, that's all I got for you today, guys. Thanks for checking the show out. Like I said, this could have been a top 10, top 15, top 20 list. There's so many different avenues I could have went with albums that change music. But drop me a comment down below. Let me know what you guys think. Of course, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me the old thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. That's all I got. Until next time, keep on spinning. Peace.